Okay, everybody, I think we're just coming up to 2 o'clock now. I'm just going to check with IT that we're going to go live streaming. Okay, thank you, Ross. Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Audit Committee. This is the rescheduled Audit Committee for the previous one that we had on 2 weeks ago, which was unfortunately cancelled because it was in quorum. So thank you all for attending at relatively short notice. I'm going to just mention that Councillor Wallace, and I did mention this at the last meeting, but it wasn't a really full meeting, Councillor, so I'll do it again this time. Councillor Wallace has replaced Councillor Grimshaw for the ensuing council. Yes, so welcome to the committee, and let's hope that we can crack on through the business today, so you get a proper meeting. Can we have the apologies for absence, please, Karen?
Peter Topping.
Right, Peter Topping is a non-voting member. He's the other independent member of the committee, so it won't make an impact on the actual voting. But I do understand that Councillor Dickinson, you need to leave at 4 o'clock today. Right, okay, well, thank you for alerting us to that. That's been useful, because what I'll do is I'll bring the item of urgent business forward on the agenda to make sure that we aren't accidentally in quorum in discussing it again, because one of the main reasons for having this on the agenda was to make sure we can ratify the decision that we made in the previous meeting. So if everybody's happy with that, I'll move that one further up the items. But I'll stick with the agenda so far. Minutes of the previous meeting. Not intending to do a page turner on this, obviously, but the minutes of the previous meeting obviously were not the last, but the last one meeting. If anybody has any issues on them. No? Can we take them as read then? That's okay, thank you. Disclosure of members' interests is the standard, unless already entered in the Council's register of members' interests. Members are required to disclose any personal interests, which includes any disclosable pecuniary interest they might have in any of the items included on the agenda for the meeting. So I take it that everybody has had the opportunity to do that and has made that. And does anybody need to make any separate disclosures of interest at this stage?
Can I just take some advice? I'm not sure whether I do or not, but there's an item on the agenda about business grants, and my wife's business was a recipient of a business grant, or several business grants. Assume that this is just reporting, really, isn't it?
I think, Councillor, just with that information, obviously there's only so much I can delve into it now, but it sounds like it might be best to declare an interest. And just not take any part in that particular matter.
I would be happy for you to sit in the meeting and obviously be in there, but not.
I just won't participate.
Don't participate.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably safest if you don't. Yeah, I think that's okay. Thank you. Yes, sorry, Councillor Dickinson.
I don't know if you could see us or hear us for the same as Councillor Oliver, directorships on companies that have received COVID support. We have had this clarified before that it wasn't necessary to declare, but if we're going down that route, I'll declare the companies that are listed on my declaration already.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that might be safest. I'm going to take your advice.
The only thing I would, sorry, Chair, the only thing I would raise is that obviously if any members are going to declare an interest and well, I don't maybe leave the room, then I'm just conscious of becoming in quorum again, particularly with yourself, Councillor Dickinson, because if you don't participate in any business, then we're going to be in quorum on that particular matter. I mean, I have to say, without any particular detail, it's hard to give any particular advice at the moment. But I'm willing to take a bit of time if we want to have 5 or 10 minutes to look into it more fully for both matters.
I'm aware that a lot of town and parish councils applied. I mean, certainly, Corbridge Parish Council, which I'm a member, they got a grant, and that might apply to other members as well, and people involved in. So I suspect if we can't take part, we might well find. I mean, I think there may be other organisations that people are involved with that have business grants.
If that's the case, Chair, I mean, it might be worth taking a little bit of time just to have a quick conversation with Councillor Oliver and Councillor Dickinson, just to get to the bottom of it. I mean, obviously, it's the reason why we ask these matters are raised beforehand. So but we can always take, that's okay, Councillor. We can always take 5 minutes now if you wish, Chair.
I mean, with respect to that, Neil, we have taken advice on this previously because COVID grant reports and such like have been put through full council, and we were advised that because they were declared as members, as companies, and the criteria was set for companies receiving grants, that we weren't making a decision on those grants and therefore had no conflict of interest in terms of dealing with the report. So I would assume that still stood, hence the fact I didn't notify previously.
I think, Chair, if advice has been obtained previously, then obviously that's pertinent, and you should comply with that advice. Obviously, that advice was given on a full consideration of the issue. So it is a matter for members, and if you've received that advice previously, then that's what you should comply with. It's been pointed out, the matter is just to note as well. So it's not, you know, like a full decision is being made on it, Chair. So I'm happy if members involved want to comply with that advice and stay in the meeting.
So would your advice, Neil, be in that case that the members should be in the meeting and would perhaps not actively take part in the meeting, but we shouldn't consider ourselves being in quorum during that discussion for that period
From what
of time?
Councillor Dickinson said, Chair, I don't think the previous advice, Councillor Dickinson, was not that it wasn't an interest at all.
At full council, I queried it before full council to see whether members should declare, because we'd had reports last year at full council about COVID grants and things, and Helen Lancaster advised that it wasn't necessary. So unless that position's changed.
No, Chair. I think that advice was given on a full consideration. You know, if you contacted Helen Lancaster before, and so I think that doesn't have the councillors involved won't have to declare an interest in this this situation, Chair. Just comply with the previous advice on it.
That seems to make sense to me. And if everybody's happy with that, that's good advice, I think. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay.
Chair,
Sorry,
I have had
Councillor,
my hand up for a considerable time. Basically, yes, I just wanted it to be known that I am also a treasurer of a charitable club who received several grants. I applied for them. I received several grants, but like Councillor Dickinson, I did make a declaration at one full council meeting, and I think the reply was similar. So
I'm imagining the same advice will apply to you then, the
I
council.
still need to have it on the minutes that I have actually declared
had
it.
advice on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Well, thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. That's been useful to have that little 5-minute discussion around that. Well, if everybody's happy with that, then for disclosure of interests, and Malcolm Cameron has just attended, I'm proposing to bring the matter of urgent business, which was number 13 on the agenda, forward, just to make sure that we don't lose anybody during the meeting, because this is a voting issue, obviously. Now, the reason for doing this is the accounts which were put through in the last but one meeting, if you like, the one that was actually the full meeting, which you have copies of, I understand, and which Karen sent the PDF out from. It was from the meeting of the 28th of July. All I'm intending to do with this, to be quite honest, is to take this opportunity to ratify the decision that we took in that meeting, because there was a question in the last meeting before we adjourned as to whether that decision could be considered legitimate, as the meeting had become in quorum just before that decision was taken and that vote was taken. So all I'm intending to do with this item of urgent business is to ratify that previous decision. Now, I'm not going to belabour this particular one, because we had a full and open discussion about the accounts last time. There doesn't seem an awful lot of profit in going through the whole thing again, but to open the floor up to any questions, anybody's got any issues particularly, you've all seen the accounts, most of you were at the meeting. Is anything that's jumping out at you that causes a problem? Because our decision at the time was to ratify the accounts and to sign them off. Councillor, you have a question?
Yeah, just to say, because I wasn't at that meeting, probably inappropriate for me to ratify the decision today. So I will abstain from that decision today.
Okay, but you have seen the accounts and you have had a chance to look at them.
I have, yes, but I didn't take part in a detailed discussion on them, so I don't feel comfortable. So I'm explaining why I will abstain from that decision today.
That's good. Okay. Councillor, you had a question as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, obviously I was at the meeting when we had a detailed look and the opportunity to ask questions about the accounts. And I made it quite plain that my view was that the accounts weren't fully complete without the value for money statement from the external auditors. That meeting was some weeks ago, and I do note that we haven't got the value for money statement yet. So I think we're still in the same position that we were at that last meeting. So my view is the same, the accounts aren't complete.
Okay. Well, I noticed that Cameron has entered the room for our external audit partner. Cameron, have you got an update on the value for money statement from, the question was raised at the last meeting in July, which unfortunately you couldn't attend, but it was whether the value for money statement would be available in the near future.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
The value for money statement is completely separate to the opinion we actually give in the financial statements. So the opinion was given in the financial statements on 25th of August, which closed that aspect of the audit down. So it isn't something that necessarily needs to be published in the actual statement of accounts themselves. So it wouldn't hold up the process for their approval. In terms of the work, that is still ongoing. I think we've said before in the committee the likely conclusion is one of qualified, probably adverse. The two issues that remain on our radar for that qualification are the Constitution not being up to date at 31st March 2020, and also the issues in relation to international that we're still discussing with the Section 151 officer.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor? It seems that, from my understanding, it's a slightly separate issue, so therefore it doesn't actually impact on the accounts themselves.
Just from the point of view of a member of an audit committee, and I'm not just really saying this to be difficult, but I don't feel that we had a complete picture until that value for money statement comes together with the accounts. So I'll join my colleague in abstaining this time, but I get the fact that the figures might be correct as far as the external auditors are concerned, but I still would rather have the complete picture put together at the same time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Well, unless there are any more comments particularly, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't move to just ratify what was taken, the decision that was taken at the last meeting, because we are a quorum meeting. The meeting that had a full discussion last time wasn't quite quorum. Can we take it that we will confirm that that decision is the decision of the Quorum Audit Committee? Is that okay? Yes.
Chair, yes. I think formally, Chair, just for procedure, you can sorry, you can move it from the Chair, you get a seconder, and then just a show of hands is probably the best way of doing it. And then the abstentions can be formally recorded.
Fine. Okay. So, sorry, you've got a comment there.
Yeah, well, I just want to clarify a point that I actually made at the last meeting, and which Councillor Towns has just reminded me about. Councillor Towns, of course, wasn't at the last meeting, and says he doesn't feel as though he should be able to vote on it because he didn't hear the discussion and the comments of the 151 officer. And of course, there is another councillor here that's in the same position. So, I mean, if it's up to that council whether they abstain or not, that's not up to me. But when you're a quorum, Neil, are we taking into consideration the abstentions as well? Are we still quorum, even though if half the people are going to abstain from the vote?
Yes, Chair. The fact that members of the committee will be abstaining doesn't affect the question of the committee being quorum. Yeah, it's just physically who's in the room. That's the question.
Okay. Okay then, so thank you for that advice, Neil, again. I propose that we ratify these accounts then and ratify the decision was taken at the last meeting, and all I'm asking for was as a show of hands, those who agree with that position, that we ratify these accounts.
Seconder, Chair.
Yes.
Just get a seconder.
Seconder, okay. Can I have a seconder?
I can second that based on the fact that the value for money exercise and things that the external auditor has said are separate from this, and based on the Section 151's report, which is very thorough, and the conversation that took place last time, which in the minutes is quite clear for me.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dickinson. So, Councillor?
Procedurally, can I just quickly check something so we don't make another mistake? But the Chair, I don't think you're a voting member, so should it be a voting member making the proposal and a voting member seconding it. I've got no idea, but I just thought better check.
I don't believe there's anything preventing a non-voting member moving a recommendation. Obviously, I appreciate why you raise it, Councillor, because but it is a fact that whoever moves a motion doesn't actually have to vote on it.
Yeah. It's an interesting question because that's never been a position that we've had here at the council before, that the chair wasn't a voting member. But okay.
And Chair, in terms of reasons, we've got to formally record the reasons for the meeting. I mean, it's up to members, whatever the reasons may be, for it being an urgent matter. I've just got some wording that I might propose here, and I've said that the matter is considered urgent and cannot be deferred until the next ordinary meeting due to the importance of confirming the accounts that have been properly adopted by the council without delay. It's very basic, so if members want to add anything to that, then that's fair enough.
Okay. Are we happy with that then? That this is an urgent meeting. So if everybody's happy for me to propose it, for Councillor Dickinson to second it, we will do this by the book. Councillor Dickinson has seconded it. And once again, can we have a show of hands, please, on who agrees? Yes, show of hands. Thank you.
4, Chair.
4. And those who disagree or abstain, obviously, Councillor. Abstentions. 2 abstentions. Thank you. Well, I think we'll take that as carried. So thank you for taking that one forward. Okay, let's move on to the standard agenda then. I will go back to urgent business at number 13 again later on, although I took that one early because it was the only voting thing we had on the agenda, so if that's okay. Reports of the Interim Executive Director of Finance and Section 151 Officer. So, do we have the Section 151 officer on the line, or?
Yes, I'm here, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Jan.
Wonderful. So the first report that you have in front of you is the Treasury Management Annual Report for the financial year 2021, and this sets out details of the performance against the Treasury Management Strategy Statement that was approved by Council in February 2020. So the report provides an overview of borrowing and investment performance and gives some context about the overall economic conditions during the year, and also reviews the specific prudential indicators as required by the SIPFA Treasury Management Code Practice and the SIPFA Prudential Code. I don't propose to go through the report in any detail, but Chair, we do have Andy Stewart here from the finance team who oversees day-to-day Treasury operations to answer any detailed questions that members may have.
Okay, thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Jan. Okay, well, I'll open this up to the floor. Anybody, any questions on this in particular? That's quite a weighty piece of work. No. Well, this must be a first. Councillor, you've got a question.
Just a general question, really. I know we sort of accept these reports on an annual basis, but we've just gone through a quite extraordinary year with the COVID crisis. And can you just give us a quick flavour of what the Treasury management challenges have been, or what effect it's had on Treasury management because of that particular reason? Thank you.
As Chair, I'm happy to do that. So as members will be aware, in response to the pandemic, the government brought forward a very significant package of support for local authorities, which included some significant Section 31 grants to assist with various matters, including the impact on collection fund. and also significant amounts of money to support the local economy and compensation for loss of fees and charges, as well as some more general support for local authorities to help them deal with the additional costs associated with responding to the pandemic. So we had a very significant influx of cash, and that has presented its own challenges at a time when interest rates have been 0.1%, finding places to invest that cash when other local authorities, which would normally be an option for us, peer-to-peer lending, has not been possible. So one of the consequences of that was that we did temporarily raise the limit on the amount of funds that we could place with money market funds, in line with the overall Treasury strategy, but a departure from our normal practice. So it has been a rather unusual year. We're not normally in this position where we have so much cash that we don't know where to place it. But the flip side of that is that because we have had such a large amount of cash, and because our reserves and balances have increased significantly as a result of the additional funding that has come in, our external borrowing has also been below where we expected it to be, because we have been able to use internal borrowing. So internal borrowing is where we, instead of taking out external loans, we just used our available cash on a short-term basis. And in common with many other local authorities, the levels of internal borrowing have been significantly higher than we would normally expect them to be. In the fullness of time, that position will unwind, and there will be a need to replace that internal borrowing with external borrowing, but it's meant that we've been able to push that out, and we have saved money on the interest that we would otherwise have paid on that external borrowing in the short term. So it's been beneficial to the council. I mean, clearly we're currently looking at refreshing the Treasury management strategy for the forthcoming year, so for 22-23, and we're engaged in discussions with our Treasury advisors on what interest rate forecasts are and what the general prospects are for the economy. So I'll be able to give a fuller update to council and to this committee in the next few months. But generally speaking, the major issue in the year that has just passed has been about how we've managed that influx of cash and the consequent knock-on effect on our borrowing activity. Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that. Does that answer your question, Councillor? Thank you. That was an interesting answer, Janet. And what I'm particularly interested in, because obviously the government has made large amounts of very cheap cash available over the last 18 months or so during the COVID crisis. That isn't going to last forever, and we're hearing a lot of things in the financial media as well about how interest rates will probably go up at least once, maybe a couple of times over the coming year. Is this something which we have the resilience to cope with, because we have been working in this very low interest rate world, as you say, with cash rich and very low interest rates? Is that going to have a major impact over the next year or so, if it happens?
Well, the latest advice from our Treasury management advisors, and this is advice that we've received just in the last few days, is that although interest rate rises are expected, we're not expecting a very big increase in interest rates. Of course, that could all change if we suddenly faced a scenario of runaway inflation, but the general consensus at the moment appears to be that the inflationary pressures are, for the most part, relatively short term, and therefore interest rates are not expected to take off. but obviously we'll keep that under review, and we don't have to make any immediate decisions on external borrowing, but you know, these things can change very, very quickly, so it's just something to keep an eye on. But at the moment, not unduly concerned about the interest rate outlook. However, you know, the committee are quite right to you know, to raise that as something which could be a potential problem if that picture changes. As far as our overall financial sustainability is concerned, as I've already said, we have added significantly to our reserves and balances over the last year. The council's finances are strong relative to most other local authorities, but financial sustainability is clearly an issue that we will need to return to as part of the MTFP discussions, because although we're in a relatively healthy position now, again, you know, we have to plan for the medium to long term, and that position could change significantly. I think we'll have a better idea of the scale of that challenge following the comprehensive spending review announcement, which is expected at the end of this month. So I think it's a question of watch this space.
Okay, thank you for that, Jan. That's a very comprehensive answer. Any more questions on this particular report? Well, I think we've been asked just to note the report, which we have. There isn't anything to vote on this one, so I think we'll take that as noted, and thank you for providing it. You have another report, Jan, I understand now, which is the statement of accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2021. Is that right?
I do, Chair, and I'm going to again just briefly introduce the report. I think we have Alan Mason from the finance team here, who has been involved in pulling together the accounts to pick up any detailed questions members may have. And also at this time, when presenting the draft accounts, it is our normal practice to invite members, if they would like to have the opportunity to sit down with members of the finance team to go through the accounts in further detail. We're very happy to extend that offer again to committee members this year. And if anyone would like to avail themselves of that, then Alan will happily make the appropriate arrangements.
Well, thank you. That's a generous offer. Thank you.
So in terms of the report itself, you know, the purpose is to present the draft unaudited accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2021 and give members an opportunity to raise any significant issues that are arising. The draft accounts, I authorised them on the 10th of September, and they have been published on the council's website, and they are now available for public inspection, and that public inspection period ends on the 21st of October. So the next step clearly will be for our external auditors to review the accounts, and then they will come back to the committee for approval. I think it's worth noting that the accounts have been presented later than the national deadline of 31st of July this year, because of the delay in signing off the accounts for the previous financial year, and clearly that has a knock-on effect on the 2021 accounts, because until the previous year's accounts have been signed off, we can't confirm the opening balances. You know, there were further accounting adjustments that were required following external audit. Ordinarily, we would be required to have the final accounts approved by the 30th of September. Clearly, that deadline has now passed. but again, in common with many other authorities, we're probably looking at towards the end of the year, possibly early in 2022, as a date to bring those accounts back following external audit. But it's always difficult to be precise about these things before the audit is actually underway. And I think that's probably all I wanted to say, Chair, by way of an overview. But as I say, happy to take any questions now, or you know, to invite members to make arrangements to come in for a more detailed discussion at a later date if they wish.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Any questions on these? Obviously, we've got a delayed set of accounts, obviously for reasons which we all understand, and we are where we are with them. My thought is this going to cause any knock-on effects or any problems, particularly, Jan? Because it is quite a big delay this year, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Chair, although I'm hopeful that it won't be as big a delay as the one that we experienced last year. Cameron may want to make a comment on this, but my understanding is that there are reasons why a significant number of councils are experiencing these sorts of delays. Clearly, there were local circumstances that resulted in a lengthy delay to Northumberland's accounts being approved for the previous year. But I think generally speaking, there are issues of capacity. COVID has had a very severe impact as well. And there have also been some quite difficult national issues that auditors and finance teams have had to grapple with. So we're not alone in this, and clearly, you know, our objective is to complete that audit and get the final accounts to you for approval and publication as quickly as we can.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'll pick along the point that you made there. We're not alone in this. Maybe I can pass this to Cameron. Is that the case, Cameron? Is this a commonplace that councils across your patch, if you like, have seen similar problems with getting the accounts signed off in time?
I don't think it's our patch, Chair. 55% of audits were late last year. Well, I'll rephrase that. There isn't actually a timetable for the audit to be undertaken. There's a timetable for the council to publish a notice or a set of audited accounts, which is slightly different, subtly different, but still different. But around 55% of councils didn't publish audited accounts by the deadline last year. My understanding that across England this year, most of the firms are in single or just into double figure sign-offs by the end of September. So if you think about the number of principal local authorities, fire, police, and smaller local government bodies there are, you can probably quite easily do the maths in terms of how many have been signed off to date. Not many. We're under double figures nationally.
Right. Okay. So this is not a unique situation. This is a national issue, if you like, along with other national issues of a similar type.
Indeed, Chair. And one might question why the department took the decision post-Redmond review, which looked at the state of the audit market as applied to local authorities, to move back to September deadline, still in the middle of a pandemic. With over half the audits already late from the prior year. And that perhaps wasn't the most sensible thing that could have been done under circumstances.
Yeah, it certainly didn't help by the sound of it. Thank you for that. Okay, well, unless anybody has any further questions on that, I think we'll accept that as sorry, Councillor Dickinson.
Just in terms of detailed bits and pieces, is it best just to email Jan directly to get that meeting in, Jan, to go over a few things?
Yes, I'm happy for you to email me directly, and I will then forward that to Alan to make the appropriate arrangements.
Lovely, thanks.
Okay, excellent. So if we can take that one as read, thank you for that, Jan. We now have item number 8, which is the Shape of Northumberland County Council consideration of going concern status for the statement of accounts for the year ended 31st of March. Is this another one of yours, Jan?
Yes, Chair, it is. If you just bear with me a moment while I find the relevant page in my in my pack because it's so large. Yes, so this is another annual report that we bring to the committee. We are required to assess on an annual basis whether the council is a going concern, and then to report that, and that's important because the going concern assumption is one of the key bases on which the accounts are prepared. So I'm sure members will be pleased to hear that the report has concluded that the council is considered to be a going concern, and that the accounts should therefore be prepared on that basis. And basically what that means is that the council will have sufficient funds to discharge its statutory responsibilities and to pay its creditors for the forthcoming year. So some of the things that we have considered are obviously the strength of our balance sheet, and in particular the amount of unearmarked reserves that are available, and our strong track record of delivering the overall budget and associated savings. The fact that we have a history of stable finances and ready access to financial resources, and there are no significant financial, operating or other risks that in my opinion would jeopardise the council's continuing operation. And clearly all of that has been put in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a significant impact on the position of the council. It has given rise to some significant and exceptional costs, as well as impacting on our income. But with the additional government support that I referred to earlier, we have weathered the storm. We have been able to continue to provide services and discharge all of our statutory responsibilities. And in my view, there is no reason to suggest that we will not be able to continue to do so for the forthcoming period. So the report details, some of those considerations in greater detail. Also takes a medium-term look at the council's financial position. And as I said previously, this is something which I will formally report on to council in February as part of the roll forward of the medium-term financial plan and the annual budget. But the council is in a relatively strong position. There are some significant cost pressures that are coming through. I'm sure you've all read the headlines about what's happening with utility prices, but I think we are seeing pay and other inflationary pressures across the board, and it will take some time for the impact of the pandemic, I think, to work through the system. So we do we do have to wait and see how quickly income levels recover. In particular, collection fund performance has been strong, but we are not out of the woods yet. So we will have to wait and see how all of that plays out. But we have significant financial resources available to help us manage the ongoing impact of COVID. In the longer term, I think, Chair, you asked the question earlier about, are we in a sustainable financial position? Clearly, it is going to be challenging to deliver the savings that are needed over the next 4 years in order to balance the budget, and at the same time making available the necessary investment that are needed to take forward the corporate priorities. So there is a significant amount of work which is going on behind the scenes to look at how we can deliver those savings, and at the same time maintain the quality of our services, and that includes things like our taking forward our digital strategy, workforce strategy, looking at income generation, commercial opportunities, as well as making sure that we're delivering value for money across everything that we do, whether that be procurement or whatever. So as I say, Chair, I will be reporting further on those matters as part of the budget report. I think in terms of capital funding, that is an area which we are currently reviewing. We do have a large capital programme. We have had a large capital programme here historically in Northumberland. We have relatively high levels of debt compared to many other councils for historical reasons, including the arrangements with Advanced Northumberland and loans made to the NHS Trust to allow them to refinance their hospital PFI. That in itself is not a problem, but we do need to be we do need to be sure that we will have the means to continue to invest at the level that we have in previous years, because it does have a revenue impact. So that is one of the areas that I'm particularly looking at as part of that sustainability review at the moment, and I will report further to Council on those matters in February.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Jan. I mean, I have just one point to pick up on, and the phrase income resilience and regaining income was mentioned a few times in your talk about the paper. What sort of problems have we had with income generally? And are you optimistic that that income can actually regain its previous levels? Because obviously, if it doesn't, that is going to be a big hole, isn't it, in the future?
It is, Chair. I mean, so far as collection of business rates and council tax is concerned, our performance has actually held up pretty well compared to most other authorities, but clearly there has been an impact. As far as collection fund losses are concerned, one of the measures that the government has introduced is the ability for any deficits to be spread over 3 years. Ordinarily, they have to be recovered in the following year. So we do have additional flexibility there. So it's probably a bit too soon to know how long it will take for collection rates to return to their previous levels. And, you know, if you consider, you know, that, as I said, we do have rising inflationary pressures. You know, the universal credit top-up is coming to an end. Furlough is coming to an end. So it may be, you know, that we continue to experience the impact of all of those things on collection rates for some time to come yet. As far as sort of more general sales fees and charges are concerned, I mean, in some areas, the pandemic doesn't appear to have had any impact at all. I mean, planning applications and planning income still strong. There are other areas where we have seen a dip in income, but there's no reason to suppose that, you know, as we continue to roll out the vaccination programme and sort of confidence returns, that that those income levels won't gradually return to normal. I just can't be absolutely sure how long it's going to take.
Thank you for that. Okay. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Dickinson.
It was just a query, Jan. So we've heard on a number of occasions, and everybody supported the executive team in the decisions that were taken during COVID, and recognised that as being the right decision. Obviously, you've identified that within this paper and within your overview around the significant costs around COVID, and I wondered, what the disparity was between our income received back from the government, because at the time we were all told as local authorities, spend whatever you need, you'll get your money back. I just wondered what that, or whether settlements were still being arranged, or whether we were now fully reimbursed.
Well, it's an evolving picture. We have had some additional COVID grant for this year, and the support for sales fees and charges during the first quarter of this financial year. At present, it looks as though the additional funding that we've had will be sufficient to cover the additional costs. One of the difficulties, I think, that we've had is we've had so many different funding streams that have been given for different purposes. You know, the Contain Outbreak Management Fund might be one example. In addition to those mainstream grants, means that, you know, having a complete overview is quite difficult. You know, it may well be, as I've said previously, that because it will take time for, I don't want to say for us to return to normality, because I'm not sure that we know what normality looks like anymore, but as it will take some time for the effects of the pandemic to work their way through the system, it may be some time before we have a complete picture, and I think that will be a backward-looking picture, and things like collection fund losses and our ability to recover, you know, sort of other debt, I think will probably be a key part of that picture. So it's not just about, you know, have the additional grants covered the day-to-day expenditure, but it's about looking at the overall financial impact. But as I say, you know, we are compared to many other authorities, you know, we are in a strong position. That we do have the ability to absorb, you know, if there is an overall financial impact, to absorb that and continue to deliver our day-to-day services without interruption.
Okay, does that answer your question, Councillor?
Kind of. I mean, it does leave it a little bit open-ended, but I appreciate it, Jan, that we're still kind of trying to have a bird's eye view of all the different streams that came in. And it's just the bit at the end that worried us slightly, Jan, where you said we had the resilience to absorb. And I'm conscious that, you know, we are a strong performing council, always have been on finance. But to think that we will be absorbing things that we had to do that we said we'd be reimbursed for sits a little bit uncomfortably. So, but I appreciate we're not at the position yet to identify whether there is actually that gap, as it were, or anything to actually absorb. So I won't read too much into it just yet.
Okay.
I suspect to be continued, Jan, but it is a good point, to be quite honest, because it's not my idea of paying back your debts by leaving you with a gap that you have to absorb yourself. So we'll pick that one up at some future date, no doubt. So thank you for that question. Any more questions before we move on? No? Okay, thank you for that, Jan. I think that we've been asked in this, the report considers the council's status as a going concern and recommends that members approve this. Do we need to approve this one? So can I again, if you're happy for me to propose that we approve this? Yes, thank you. And we have a seconder? Yeah. Councillor Dickinson. So we've approved it. I take it. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. But I think you're on again. Is that right?
I am, Chair. I'm sorry, you're going to get tired of my voice.
No, you're definitely
before
earning
very long.
You're earning your corn today, Jan. Thank you.
So again, this is an annual report that we bring to the Audit Committee, giving you an update on the work that we've undertaken, or the work that the corporate fraud team have undertaken. And this report covers the period April 2020 to 31st of March 21. It sets out a range of activities that have been undertaken by the fraud team, gives some statistics around the number of referrals that have been received and the outcomes. I would point out to the committee that the ability to actually impose sanctions was significantly hampered during the past year due to the pandemic. As you will see in the table, as a result, no formal sanctions such as prosecution, formal caution or administrative penalty were imposed. But as and when we are able to continue normal operations, I would expect a number of those things to be brought back into play. So, Chair, I'm very happy again to take any questions that members might have.
Okay, thank you, John. Any questions on this one? Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I read this governance statement, and the general reasoning behind it is to actually give confidence in the governance of the council, and within it there are sort of statements that the head of internal audit, for example, has reviewed all of the governance through the year and is happy with everything that's been going on with the council. In that way, it sort of seems to skate over some of the problems that this council have had over the last year. So if you look at the start of the report, it starts with some principles, and the number one principle, number A, includes respecting the rule of law, and then G is about implementing good practices in transparency, reporting and audit to deliver effective accountability. And then it talks about regularly reviewing the adequacy and effectiveness of these arrangements. I think that that there are some serious issues that I feel as a councillor haven't been fully investigated and fully resolved. So there is this question that's an ongoing question about whether the council has been actually acting within the law in respect to one particular instance. I think there isn't a recognition about that revolving door that we've had of statutory officers over the last year or two. It's been one in and one out, and there is a sort of strong feeling that they haven't really been allowed to have time to sort of bed in and make a difference. I think at the moment we don't have a monitoring officer. We've had a couple of interim monitoring officers for a while, and then they weren't replaced, and now we haven't got one at all. And I don't think there's an adequate reflection of that in the report, because I think that's a serious issue for this council. I think in relation to audit, it's really important that the audit committee is seen to be independent and able to work within its remit in terms of reference. Yet at our first meeting of this municipal year, we were effectively told by officers that we weren't allowed as audit committee members to actually raise issues and put issues on the agenda for investigation. I think there's reference in the report actually itself to something that was created within the council in the officer structure called the Governance Accountability Group. I don't think that was actually ever even brought to the attention of the council, and it was there to review the process of a number of complaints, but it wasn't sort of recognised within this report that some of the officers on the Governance Accountability Group were actually the officers bringing those complaints, that then they were looking into the process of how it was going to be done, and I think that was inappropriate. And then various other issues to do with whistleblowing and to do with a number of complaints that don't seem to have been investigated at all. So I think the report is a bit of a whitewash in my view. Might obviously be the rest of the committee's view, but that's my personal view, and therefore I won't be able to accept this report as it's written now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, my own opinion, I think some of those things probably go into too much granular detail for a report of this nature. I would have expected. I know
Well, actually, there is a considerable degree of detail in the report itself. And I could go through them one by one, but I don't think we've got time to do that.
Probably wouldn't be appropriate, I don't think, anyway. But thank you for your contribution. But my personal take on this is that would be too much granular detail for a report of this nature. And also, a lot of these things I understand have been looked at in other areas anyway, so it's probably not appropriate to necessarily go through them in this sort of report. Councillor, do you have a comment there? No? Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I was going to sort of raise a question under sort of urgent business, but it's kind of relevant to this, so I'll just sort of summarise it. I think we, at the not the last meeting that we sort of abandoned, but the previous meeting, we had a discussion around, I think Peter's referenced it, around how the internal audit function works, and you quite rightly pointed out the terms of reference to us and told us that we would be working quite rightly to those terms of reference, and that, you know, if we had issues that we were concerned about as members of the audit committee, we should raise those, but we should raise it sort of with the whole group rather than, I think you described it as, you know, taking guerrilla action. And I did raise some issues, and you know, and I think the this report sort of points to the problem we've got, and I think those issues that I raised, and Peter's mentioned them. He's talked about potential sort of illegal operation of part of the council. He's talked about recruitment, and he's also talked about the sort of governance and accountability processes of the council. You'll recall last year when I was the portfolio holder that there were a whole heap of new governance arrangements that came to informal cabinet without a written report, that then came to the audit committee without a written report, and some new structures were put in, the SOG, the Statutory Officers Group, and the GAG, the Governance Accountability Group. Now, many of the officers that were part of those groups have left, or some of them have, but I do know that those arrangements have not been sort of properly used. So I guess the point I'm coming to is that what's in this report and the way the governance of the council is being described, if that were how it was happening, then it would be very strong. But I think there are serious deficiencies at the moment, and I think we have a duty as members and as members of the audit committee to sort of raise those things. And I think it would be good at some point during this meeting to have this discussion about what the process is for raising those things, because I was told that the three items that I raised couldn't be, and I think the Director of Assurance, who's now left the council, said it at the end of the meeting, is that that basically it would be fundamentally, I think she that would decide what goes onto the work programme, and not members of the audit committee. Now, when I sat on the other side of the table, that was not how I understood it worked, and that was not how I was told it would work. I mean, the audit committee is an important function of council governance. So if we don't have the ability to bring things forward, and not everything we bring forward might be relevant, but there needs to be a sort of open and transparent discussion about that. And there was one other issue raised at that first meeting that has been, we've got a report on it today. Another member raised business grants, and that was done, but three other things have been refused. So I can't support a governance statement that I don't believe accurately reflects what is actually happening, and I've got some serious concerns about what is actually happening. So I think, like Councillor Jackson, and we haven't discussed it before this meeting, but I'm in total agreement that I can't sort of support what I've
Okay.
seen as serious deficiencies.
Okay, so if I'm reading you right, Councillor, yourself as well, Councillor Traxton, what you're saying is that what we have is good practice on paper, not so good practice in reality, and that's the position you're coming from. And I think Daljeet, you had your hand with the Chief Executive. Would like to
Yes,
comment
thank
on
you, Chair. Obviously, matters that this committee wants to look at are for your, as the Chair, and for your members and your agreement. The Statutory Officers Group was mentioned. That is a meeting I chair of statutory officers. It does what it says on the name. It has a set terms of reference for officers, and each of the statutory and governance officers bring forward key and critical issues prior to them going through, where necessary, formal cabinet processes. So I can provide some assurance to the committee that those arrangements in place. I haven't been party to the other groups that the members have mentioned, so I can't comment on those. But should they have issues around those, I'm quite happy for them to put them in writing to me and or the relevant statutory officers, and they can be looked into should they wish to do that. I think the other important issue about this report, and I'm sure Jan will comment should she feel necessary, it has informally been through the cabinet process through our informal mechanism, and it has had sign-off from the lead member for corporate services and the leader of the council, who've raised no issues of concern about its and given they're closest to the running of the organisation and have given have raised no concerns about that. Alongside that, we do have a review ongoing, which is just recently being commissioned. It's going around the scheme of delegation, which will bring up, will be formally reviewed. So I do think clearly some of the members have indicated that some of the previous officers have been involved. I think some of the members have been involved in some of these issues too. What I would say is that in any areas that are raised with us, we do take appropriate statutory officer advice. We have, where necessary, taken external legal advice, whether that's from lawyers or from QCs. So I'm quite happy to say that I fully support the statement that's before the council. You know, no council is ever, before the committee, no council is ever perfect. There's always issues we can do better. And the officer team have thoroughly reviewed this statement. It's been to every executive director, service director, and they've completed their sections, brought it forward, taken it through the informal process for consultation with cabinet members prior to bringing it. So I just think there's, happy if there's other issues that people want to write in to us about, and we'll take a look at them, but no. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm more than happy that Neil as the Deputy Monitoring Officer or Jan as the Statutory 151, we make up the three, along with Helen Lancaster, the statutory officers, key officers in the statutory officers group. I can also reassure the committee that the monitoring officer role, our monitoring officer only left us last week. We do have arrangements in place, and it's very likely that we'll have somebody in post imminently who will need to go to approval in full council on the 3rd of November. That report is in process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, from the Chief Executive. Now, I think to say hands up over here, and yourself as well, Councillor Dickinson. Sorry, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I think the issues that Councillor Oliver and Councillor Jackson have highlighted do actually give me some concerns. I've listened carefully to what the Chief Executive just said, and I find that those are reassuring comments in light of the concerns raised. But I think what hit home with me, particularly something Councillor Jackson said, was about what he described as a revolving door of senior officer of the monitoring officer. We've just heard from the Chief Executive about the monitoring officer leaving recently. I don't know how many we've had in the last 12 or 18 months, but it seems to me to be quite an extraordinarily high number of monitoring officers going through that role and not staying for very long. And I actually really agree with Councillor Jackson that presents, while it might not have given rise to any problems. It certainly gives rise to the risk of problems, because I'd like to know why people are leaving, so why aren't they staying in the role so much?
Okay.
And I just wondered, there was mention of a part of the council acting lawfully or unlawfully, and I appreciate that's something we can't maybe discuss the detail of in this part of the meeting. But I wonder if the external auditor has any comments on this discussion. If not, fine, but I'd like to hear from you if you do, please.
Well, can I pass you on to
the chair, of course.
Daljeet? Thank you. Daljeet will respond to the first question that you had there. Now, Councillor Dickinson, I know you have a point as well, which I'll come to you, and then I'll come to Cameron after Daljeet.
Could I just clarify? We've only had one monitoring officer since 2008. He has been in that role since then, and he left us last week. As is his right, he has nominated deputy monitoring officers, which a number of councils do, should they have a lot of business or have some absence. So I think it's an important clarification. We've only had one monitoring officer, not a number of monitoring officers.
I mean, the phrase revolving door at senior level has been used. Is that a perception or a reality, do you think?
Well, I think, you know, we've had some difficult situation. We've had a very difficult situation, as everyone knows, in the last couple of years. Now, if officers find it difficult to remain with the authority, which has happened on occasion, they will move on. We've had probably higher turnover than I would have liked, but I think, you know, that's the circumstances we've found ourselves in, and it's been unfortunate. We have, though, at all times maintained statutory officer cover. The Deputy 151 officer has worked for this council for over 20 years and has been supported when has continued to oversee work effectively. The monitoring officer, as I've said, has been in post since 2008, and myself, as the third statutory officer, has worked here since 2007. So I think we have some very long-standing officers. We have had other officers, as other authorities have come and left, but you know, at the end of the day, we have the arrangements in place through Statutory Officers Group and other officers group. We've very recently revised our, through a report to full council, our executive management arrangements. We have all posts covered and arrangements in place. And as members are aware, we've got a review ongoing to look at permanent arrangements, which we'll report to council on the 3rd of November. We have regular meetings with our cabinet and obviously leader and deputy leader every week and keep them advised, and there are no concerns that have been raised with me about that.
Okay, thank you. You had a second question for external audit, Councillor, as well, so I'm going to bring Cameron in at this point just to...
Chair, just before we do that, I just want to get the... Sorry, Councillor Town, I was just slightly concerned about what the question actually is. It seems to me to be a question of asking external audit, or is the council acting illegally in some matter? It wasn't. If that wasn't the question, then I think
no, through you, Chair,
we need to clarify.
I'd just like to know if this is an appropriate opportunity to bring the external auditor in to this discussion. He may not have any comment to make. I'm just interested to know if he does have a comment to make.
Chair, sorry, I just wasn't wanting to put external auditor in an awkward position.
No, exactly, and I'm sure Cameron would be happy to tell us if he was in an awkward position and didn't want to comment, but I didn't take that insinuation that there was any illegal activity in this. It was just giving the external audit a chance to have an opinion on this if they want one.
I'll be honest, Chair, I'm probably with it's Neil, isn't it? I'm not sure what the question was, but I think the answer is probably we haven't actually started to audit the annual governance statement yet. And you'll be aware, Councillor, that we have to audit the annual governance statement, both in terms of its balance, in terms of is it fair summary of the Council's arrangements, weaknesses, scope for improvement, but also whether or not that is underpinned by robust evidence. And that is something we will be doing over the next, it's October, isn't it, the next few months through to Christmas. Coming back to Jan's point earlier around about timetable, we are aiming for Christmas. That doesn't mean we're going to hit Christmas, but that's what we're aiming for, to get 2021 out of the way, because we would like the audit of Northumberland County Council to move back towards the deadline that we all have to meet from next year. I'm not sure that's answered your question, Councillor Towns, exactly, but hopefully it has. The other observation I have, and I'm not sure if it's Councillor Jackson that made it or Councillor Towns, is that it clearly is a matter for the Audit Committee to decide upon its own work programme and its own business. It's clearly not a matter for officers. That is something for officers to provide professional advice on, but it is, regardless of that, the committee's decision on its own work programme and its in the business it considers.
That is
appropriate to its terms of reference.
That is
which
my
I think was a
understanding.
question that was raised earlier by one of the councillors.
I think you're right. I think it was Councillor Jackson that raised that one earlier on, and I quite agree with that, is that it is a legitimate role of the Audit Committee, and that is why we have this statement of the purpose and the responsibilities of the Audit Committee in there, so that we actually understand where our remit lies. And I think it sits fairly squarely, with officers obviously providing their professional guidance, but not necessarily dictating what is and what isn't the remit of the committee. So, sorry, Councillor, you had another question.
So I think there's a couple of things there. And I note the answer that we've had from the Chief Executive about the monitoring officer, and I obviously I accept what she's saying. Really what I think, Councillor, I'll not speak for Councillor Jackson, but I think he might have been getting to this point, was that the person fulfilling that function, fulfilling that duty, those roles, there have been a number of people over a short period of time fulfilling that function, while the permanent officer was not available to fulfil that function. And that gives me the same concerns. But I fully accept the clarification that the Chief Executive has given on that. On the point of the annual governance statement, I think we're just being, it's recommended to us today that we approve a draft statement, but that draft, if I've heard Cameron correctly, remains subject to external audit, who will look at whether this is a balanced statement, and would presumably at that point take into account the kind of concerns that members have raised today. But if we can just get confirmation on that will give me a bit more assurance that I'm with these recommendations.
Jan's probably best placed to answer that one. Jan, my understanding is that is exactly what we're doing here, that we're approving this as a draft, and it will be audited and thoroughly reviewed at a later point, and that come back to this committee.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. And I must apologise to the committee, because when I made my introductory remarks, I had skipped over the annual governance statement and introduced the next report on the agenda, which may account for some of the confusion. So I do apologise for that. It's because the report wasn't in the pack in front of me, but was circulated separately. Just to hopefully bring some clarity, this is a draft statement which captures all of the governance issues that took place up in the 2021 financial year. So issues that have happened subsequent to that are not captured in this report, and some of the matters that have been touched on today, I am aware, the issues have been raised, but they are not matters that would form the subject matter for this report. However, this is a draft statement. It will now be audited by Nhs, and at the point that the final accounts are approved, a final version of the annual governance statement will also come back to the committee to capture any further issues that we're aware of in between the date of the draft accounts being published and the final accounts. So you will see an updated version of this, and what I can say is that some of the matters that members have touched on today are under discussion or ongoing investigation. Some of these things do take time to investigate. The matter, the international issue about whether the council acted within its powers, which is how I would describe it, rather than doing something illegal, which has a rather different connotation. That is a matter which Cameron and I are discussing. I have taken external legal advice on that, and Cameron and I are in discussion about that, and in order to help him come to a view on that matter, so that he can report on it as part of his value for money opinion. So I wouldn't want the committee to be left with the impression that any of the issues, any of the governance issues that have been raised are not being dealt with, but some of these matters are complex and it is taking some time to get to the bottom of them and arrive at a conclusion. And that does include various allegations that have been made under whistleblowing procedures, code of conduct, etc. So Chair, that is the position. If I could just take the opportunity just to comment, and I'm trying to be helpful here in terms of clarifying the issue about whether the committee can set its own work programme. So far as I'm aware, I don't think that has been in doubt. I think I was present for the discussion, with the Director of Corporate Assurance, and my understanding is that that was about the internal audit programme. Now, the Chief Internal Auditor brings an audit planning report to this committee on an annual basis, which sets out the risk assessment and a programme of proposed audits based on that risk assessment. And my understanding is that excuse me, is that internal audit programme that she was referencing in her comments. So I don't think at any point anyone has questioned whether this committee is free to set its own work programme. I suspect that there's been a bit of misunderstanding on that point.
I think, yeah. If I can just say, John, I think we've probably been talking across purposes around about the remit of the committee and the remit of internal audit. And I think from my own personal experience, that the Chief Internal Auditor brought a very transparent work programme to the Audit Committee, I think, before as a draft, and gave the Audit Committee members a chance to talk to the auditors about that and have their input into it. As a result, I think some tweaks were made to that, which is, I think, exactly the way it should make. But I think we've been talking about the remit of the committee rather than the remit of internal audit particularly. Can I probably...
Just to pick up, I was going to try and come in, I think now seems the right time just to kind of pick up on a couple of things there. I think I would agree with everything that's been said so far. I'm not aware of the three specific issues which Councillor Oliver referred to, but I would just like to reiterate that any member of Audit Committee, or indeed any member at all, can raise any issues with me as Chief Internal Auditor, and then I will consider those as part of my work. I think I do bring an audit plan to Audit Committee in March every year. That is a plan. It is a plan of work for the year ahead. If new emerging risks or potential issues are brought to light during the year, it is incumbent upon me to consider each of those issues and how they would sit vis-a-vis the risks which are within the current internal audit plan. And if that plan needs to change during the year, that's a normal part of our work, and that's what I would be required to do. As part of the normal reporting back to you as an audit committee during the year, I would then be reporting to you any variances in the planned work as a result of new emerging risks coming through. It's unusual for any year for that not to happen. So I have heard it said in the past, if an audit team achieves its plan exactly as it was set, the plan was wrong in the first place. So it's anecdotal, but I hope that brings the point across, because you're planning 12 months ahead and you can't see what some of those risks may be. But I have a duty to balance the resource available to me to direct that resource to the risks that are greatest, because we can't cover everything. So I hope that sort of clarifies that issue. I think the work plan issue, I think maybe has got a little bit confused. And I think it's entirely for Audit Committee to determine what Audit Committee needs to receive in order to fulfil its own terms of reference. If Audit Committee agree that there's a specific piece of work or report that they're required to receive to fulfil their duties, that would be for Audit Committee to decide. Yes, officers can advise, but it would be for Audit Committee to decide that. And I think the only other issue that I would kind of mention, which links the two, is that I know in previous meetings of the committee, we've talked about the 3 lines of defence, and that it's possibly not always a report from internal or external audit. There are a number of other assurance sources available to the committee in the first and second lines of defence. So any issues which I may consider under the first item we talked about, it may not be that it's a piece of work for internal audit to to undertake, it may be that assurance can be provided through a different source to the committee.
Well, thank you for that. No, Kevin, that was extremely lucid, and I think probably summed up my position on this better than I could have summed it up myself. So thank you for doing that. I noticed some hands up before. Councillor Oliver, you had another question.
That's very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think there has been some confusion, but it seems to me what we're saying now is that the audit committee can influence the internal audit work programme. We can't sort of instruct you what to look at, but we can raise issues. You'll assess the risk of those issues. You'll presumably look at them in those risks in comparison with what is already on the work programme, your work programme, not our work programme. Yeah, the plan. And if those risks of those things being brought forward, you determine to be greater than the things already on the plan, presumably you would then prioritise them. Because the issue around business grants was raised at the last meeting or the last full meeting. Yeah. That's already appeared in a report today. And so that clearly can happen. So if perhaps under any other business, then I can raise those three issues then, and we can actually have a bit of a discussion about whether we,
Absolutely. My understanding is that it not only can happen, it does happen.
Yeah.
I think I have seen it since I started here as an independent man. I've seen it happening in front of us. And I think one of the key things is you don't have inexhaustible resources on internal audit, so we have to be reasonable and bear that in mind, as they can't drop everything and just run around. Otherwise, I have seen audit teams that have tried to be so helpful to audit committees that they've ended up not delivering their audit plan because they've been doing so many odd pieces of work here, there and everywhere. So we have to be mindful of that as well. But they also have to mind, as Kevin said, the three lines of defence. It isn't always the internal auditors that we need to address some of these things too. It could be other people as well, in my opinion. So I think that's my position. Councillor Dickinson, it seems like quite a long time ago when you've had your hand up for a question. I'm sorry it's taken so long to get to you.
Yes, if anybody is still hanging on in there on their Thursday afternoon watching this, I think Jan picks up a valid point about the language that's used in relation to some of these things, because what we shouldn't be doing is labelling things as illegal when we're talking about exercising the council's ability to do something. I think the other thing is, we've got the leaders' approval on this, the deputy leader's approval. It's been through a process, but actually the three things that certain members are discussing here probably aren't appropriate, Neil, and I thought they would have been ruled out quite early on. We're all aware of current investigations that are continuing. We're all aware of ICO investigations, code of conduct investigations, whistleblowing investigations that will undoubtedly have an outcome which will, in some cases, members will have to take responsibility for that revolving door they keep referring to. So I think we just need to get into perspective what's going on. We need to look at that governance statement and realise that it's a good piece of work. It's been signed off appropriately. It's been through proper channels. Chief Executive's given clarity on several areas. External audit's given clarity, internal audit, and I certainly wasn't under any impression that anybody would prevent me or any other member from trying to set the agenda, adding things on or influencing the plan. I think Alison gave a clear indication of how that all worked, and clearly cross purposes have been either misinterpreted or otherwise. But I mean, this is just a straightforward document. It's got another process to go through. The evidence will be provided that backs up the document. It'll be done externally. It'll then provide the committee with the assurance they're looking for. I just think we've gone round in circles for the last 35 minutes for no reason.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor, you had a final point?
Thank you, Chair. Just point of clarity on 2 points of clarity on that. From my recollection, and it is an important distinction. The word illegal has not been mentioned by any member of this committee. The word unlawful was used. There is a big difference between something that is illegal and something that is unlawful.
I think personally we're getting a little bit cut up on semantics here, and I think we could easily go down a rabbit hole here.
We are, Chair, but I think it's worth just making this clear, because Councillor Dickinson has referred to members of the public who may be watching this. No member of this committee has mentioned the word illegal. No member of this committee mentioned the detail of what they were concerned about with unlawfulness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to draw this to a close now because one final question, Councillor Audit, and then we'll
Well,
draw it to a
just
close.
sort of coming back on a couple of points. I do get the Chief Executive's explanation that there has been a monitoring officer in place for the last year, but she did actually fail to say that he'd been, I think, on sick leave for the entire period of that year. And that's why I feel as a member that I haven't had full and unfettered access to that statutory officer. I think there's a sentence near the end of the report that sums it up for me. The annual government sets out the council's governance framework. That's fine. And then it also sets out the results of reviews of the effectiveness of the council's arrangements. And then it mentions within the report some of the things that I was talking about earlier on, and sort of accepts that all of those arrangements were reasonable and well implemented and in line with all good governance. And that's the bit that I don't accept. I do take comfort that the external auditor will review this report. I can't accept this report as it's written at the moment, but I would appreciate a detailed discussion with the external auditor about all of these reports, all of these items within the report, and then I'll take comfort from that. Thank you.
My understanding is that this is a draft for approval at this stage, and as such it is just a draft. It will be independently validated and checked by the external auditor. So
Yeah, but I can't approve a draft if I don't approve it.
well, okay. We are where we are with this. I think that we've probably gone around the houses with this for quite a long time. I think we'll probably spend a bit longer on this than we probably should have done. But it's all been valuable stuff. One final one, Councillor.
Can I just propose that we accept the recommendations and the draft report as presented, Chair?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Do we have show of hands?
Just need a seconder first, Chair.
Seconder.
I'll second that, Chair.
Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Proposed and seconded. Any show of hands? Do we approve this? 2. Bearing in mind it is a draft.
I don't know. Sorry, Chair. It's a point of clarity. I think I get what Councillor Jackson's saying, but if this is a draft and it's going to the external auditor, and these comments can be taken into account in the external auditor's review of it, then I don't have too much of a problem with approving it myself.
Okay, so is that an approval then? Yeah. Okay, so we are where we are with it. So that's 3 people, and then the other gentleman who haven't. I take it you don't approve it.
I can't approve it. Sorry.
Yeah.
If we could say, there's 3 approvals, Chair. Those against? Is there any against? And then we'll move on to abstentions.
No, so it's 3 against. 3 approvals, 3 against. Okay. So where
Chair,
does that
that's not passed. It's normally, I think we might have to look into procedure, Chair, because it's normally chairman's cast and vote, but you're the chair and you're a non-voting chair.
This is an interesting one. Well, if I gave you my provisional vote now.
I think so.
Yeah. Neil, if I give you my provisional vote now, can you look into that and say whether that provisional vote would be?
Look into it now, Chair.
Yeah. Well, I would vote for.
Chair, is one of the councillors not the deputy chair?
Yes.
And you maybe need the bathroom.
Yeah, I'll just check. Who's checked deputy chair?
It certainly is an unusual situation.
Well,
I think the point of the matter is, Chair, also that with it being a draft report, it can't go for external audit unless it's improved here. So it's a kind of a stalemate, silly situation.
Yeah.
We will still audit it regardless of whether you actually approve it today or not.
Well, that's
Well, that's helpful.
I might be able to help you.
Yeah.
We've got a vice chair on the committee here, and he could possibly be allowed the casting vote. I'm being helpful.
But he's already voted,
Councillor,
yeah.
is that the rules of procedure just say chairman's cast and vote? You don't say vice chairman's cast and vote. We're just looking at whether the chairman is a voting chair or not, because I think the version that I've got here isn't necessarily the up-to-date version.
Right. I don't think we can hold things up much longer.
Chair, if I may,
Yes, John.
in an effort to move things on, the relevant regulations are the accounts and I'm sorry, Chair. Let me just get it correct. The Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015, which require the authority to conduct a review of the effectiveness of the system of internal control and prepare an annual governance statement, which must be considered by the relevant committee and approved by a resolution of a committee, in our case the Audit Committee, or meetings of the Council as a whole. So given that this is a draft, if the committee are unable to agree the draft as it currently stands, it's not necessarily fatal, but the committee will have to approve the final annual governance statement.
Well,
the alternative would be to take it to full council.
Right,
So
okay.
I'm wondering if that might give us a way forward where some further discussion is had, and perhaps we bring forward some a slightly revised draft which might satisfy members' concerns.
Well, that's an alternative. Councillor Oliver, you had a point.
I was just wondering to move it on. I mean, I can't change my view about approving the statement, but what I can do is, if the recommendation was changed to approve this draft annual governance statement be forwarded to the external auditor as part for his audit, then I'd be more than happy to approve that. But
it's slightly playing with words, because my understanding from Cameron is they're going to audit it come hell or high water anyway.
in that case,
So, you know, yeah.
In terms of the accounts, if you use the accounts analogy, you're approving the accounts, the draft accounts, as you have to have, subject to audit. You have to add the word subject to audit on them, the draft. The annual governance statement is essentially no different.
Right. So if
approve it subject to audit.
So if that small addition, agree subject to audit, is added, can we do the vote again then?
Sorry, Chair, point of order. I think we're still overcooking this. We've been presented with a view which is, it's not been approved today, but it still has to be approved later down the line once it's been through external audit. If that works, then that's fine with me. I think we've had our vote. Let's just leave it at that.
Okay.
It's not causing a problem as far as I've just heard.
Jan, I'm going to give you the final say on this one, because we do need to move on.
Okay, the normal practice would be to publish the draft annual governance statement alongside the draft accounts, which you have just approved for publication today. So we can either leave things as they are, and we will just publish the draft as it is, or you know, I'm happy if members wish me to seek to circulate a further draft which takes on board members' issues and concerns that they've raised today. But the outcome won't be any different either way. This statement will be audited by Nhs and a final version then brought back to you for approval.
Well,
in
from the
due
shaking
course.
heads around the room, Jan, I'm thinking that there isn't any need to actually amend this. Is that correct from the opinion I'm getting here?
Okay.
Maybe just present this.
If it goes
Yeah.
to audit
Yeah.
unamended, then that's fine. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
want to stop it going to audit. I just don't
Right, look,
agree with the
I
content.
think we've
all
come
of
to
the
we've come to an agreement here. The vote is what it is. And Neil has obviously to look into whether I am allowed a casting vote on this, but that's probably a secondary issue in this one. So we'll take Jan's suggestion that this goes forward as it is, and we don't have to amend anything from there. So thank you for that. Yeah. Okay. After that epic, I think, Jan, we've got another one from you. It's just the one that you were very keen to get into, which was the fraud report.
Yes.
And if this is half as exciting as the other one,
Apologies again, Chair. I was very eager to get onto the counter fraud annual report. I'm not going to introduce it again because I think I've said what I need to say. It's been a rather strange year. There's been, significant constraints on the amount of proactive fraud work that we can do. So the team have investigated any referrals to the best of their ability, and the report summarises the output of all of that. So happy to take questions.
okay. Well, thank you. Any questions around the room? Yeah, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Not really a question, just a comment. I'm always really impressed when we see the work of this team and when we hear about it, and this impressive work obviously continues, and it's really important that this level of due diligence is undertaken, especially when it comes to the right to buy, and it's really exciting to see that we're continuing to commercialise that service for third parties, external third parties too. So just really, thank you for the report, and well done to the team, because they keep coming up with great results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and certainly echo that. Any more? Councillor Dickinson.
Sorry, John, I may well have missed it, and apologies if I have, but did the fraud work include the fraud did it include the financial year in relation to COVID grants and fraudulent claims?
My
Sorry,
understanding is it did. Yeah.
Yes, so there was a certain amount of work that was done during the year in relation to the COVID grants. Internal audit have been significantly involved in some of those checks, and that a lot of that verification work is still ongoing. But you will see in here in the external fraud table that there were 18 COVID-19 grants that were referred to the team for investigation. So as and when those cases were picked up and fraudulent activity had been detected, they were investigated by the team.
I just wondered if you, for that period of time, encapsulated whether it encapsulated the whole COVID grant period, and whether you thought 18 is probably set to rise quite large. You're on mute, Jan.
Apologies. No, it didn't encompass the whole period. We continued to pay grants past the 31st of March 21, and there is a huge amount of verification work that has been undertaken in the intervening period and is still ongoing. And some of that is at national level. It's not just the work that we're doing locally, but we're also cooperating nationally to pick up some of the large-scale fraud. So it is quite possible that other cases will come to light as a result of that work.
Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you. Just one from myself, Jan. DWP joint working, only one. Is that normal? Or is that number fallen?
Yeah, I think that probably is a bit on the low side. You know, that area is one of the areas I suspect where we haven't had the number of referrals that we would normally expect, because DWP working has been impacted in the same way that our activity has.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, you have a question?
Yeah. You mentioned about the total, there've been no sanctions before, and I understand that, and that's absolutely fine. But I noticed that the right to buy, there was 35 of them were withdrawn, and which has then saved £1,438,845, which is, unless my guesstimation is wrong, just over £40,000 each. I mean, would there be, would these prosecutions of these be brought in the future, or is this not? Or is answer no, basically?
I suspect it will depend on the individual cases. I don't think it's our normal practice to prosecute in every case. That, so far as we're concerned, it's a good outcome if the application is withdrawn. But in really blatant cases, a decision might be taken to prosecute. But we would look at each case on its merits. So there is no blanket policy.
Okay, so there's no way of knowing whether these 35 were actually accidental, you know, misunderstanding of the rules and what have you, and the difference between that and maybe deliberate attempted fraud.
Indeed, and I suspect that it will be a mix, but as I say, where we have reason to suspect that it is deliberate and it is, you know, clearly fraudulent, we would normally seek to prosecute, but you know, we would need to get a view on the likely success of a prosecution. So I can't give you a definitive answer without understanding the circumstances of each particular case.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, unless there are any more questions, I think we'll take that report as received. So thank you for that, Jan. I think that was your last report. Well, thank you for your epic input into today's meeting. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, now we move on to the report of the Executive Director of Adult Social Care and Children's Services. It's a review of external inspection reports for adults and children's services. So we have here, and it is going to be presented by, who's presenting this?
So I am the... Apologies, it's my report, but Alan Hartwell will be presenting it today.
Okay, thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kath. Yes, I'm Alan Hartwell. Good afternoon, and I'm the author of this report. This is the latest in a series of reports on external inspection activity within children's and adult services. Members will recall that certainly prior to the pandemic, this committee was receiving these reports on a 6-monthly basis, and this is the latest update. Members will have seen that the inspection activity has been limited as a result of the pandemic, but there has been some inspection activity and undertaken by both the Care Quality Commission in relation to adult care services, and also led by Ofsted as well in relation to children's services. And the report describes what that activity has been, starting off with adult care services, then looking at children's residential services, the inspections within schools, early years, and then finishing off last and not least with the local area revisit around special educational needs and disabilities. The outcomes of these inspections, as the report details, have been strong on the whole. If it's okay, Chair, I would like to draw attention to sections 5.2, in 5.2.2 in particular around schools, because one of the fortunate impacts of the timing of this meeting is that we now have updated information. There have been updated published reports on the school inspections that are referred to in that section, so I can provide members with an updated position on that. Specifically then, with regards to section 5.2.2, members will have seen that within the report at the very end of the last academic year, there were inspections undertaken, and the outcomes of those were that for the Blythe Academy, who were previously under a judgment of requires improvement, that was judged to be good, and that report has just recently been published. And the impact of that is that within that section 5.2, where there is a figure of 19 out of 30 secondary schools being judged by Ofsted as being good or outstanding, that now increases up to 20 out of 30. And also the Haydenbridge High School, we've received the published report for that as well. The Haydenbridge High School, as the report does indicate, was judged by Ofsted as being inadequate, and that has now moved to requires improvement. So 2 changes there. For the other 2 inspections that were undertaken around Amble, Links and also Scremiston, both of those schools remain as good within those published inspection reports. So that's an update there for members from when the report was originally submitted. The other area really that I just wanted to refer to was section 5.2.4, which is around what's known as the revisit following the local area special educational needs and disabilities inspection, which took place in October 2018. And the reason why it's called local area is that it's a joint inspection by Ofsted and the Care Quality Commission, and it looks at services for that group of children and young people aged 0 to 25, not just provided by the council, but also provided by health services as well, and the activity of the clinical commissioning group. Members will have seen within the report that as a result of that revisit, which took place in May 2021, it was deemed that Northumberland had demonstrated sufficient progress on all of the 3 areas that within the written statement of action. And as a result, the quarterly monitoring meeting that we have with the Department for Education, that requirement was fulfilled, and that monitoring was ceased as a result of it after the report was published in July. And within the report, within the papers, that full letter that we received back from Ofsted is in there in full for members to look at if they want to see some more detail. I think that largely covers it, Chair, in terms of the key points really that I'd want to raise from the report, but happy to respond to any questions now, and as Kath said, okay, she's available as well.
Well, thank you for that. That sounds like a largely positive report with a lot of things moving in the right direction. So thank you. I'll take any questions if anybody has any. Councillor Orwell.
Thank you, Alan. That was really, really encouraging. I mean, particularly Haydenbridge and Blythe for that, really positive outcome. Could you just give us just sort of slightly on a slightly wider basis? Obviously, COVID has had a massive impact on education, probably more than anything else. What's sort of your view on how quickly the lost ground can be recovered? I don't mean specifically to Northumberland. I just mean generally, more generally. But as an education expert, how quickly can we catch up, basically?
Sorry, I'll take that question. I could see Alan's face thinking, oh, I'm not really sure. I think it's fair to say that there's an awful lot of resources that are being targeted at our schools in order to try and help with the general catch-up of our young people and our children generally. Lots of children are very resilient and have gone back to school eager to learn and wanting to make improve their education. Lots of our children are going to need some additional support. Schools have received additional funding for tutoring. They're receiving additional funding for different types of programs over the coming year to 2 years. I think the vast majority of our schools from September, their primary aim has been to kind of steady the ship and make sure that children are receiving access to the curriculum that they need to in order to progress. We had some, the government published or disclosed recently what their information was in relation to what exams would look like next year. and so schools are busy trying to unpick that to determine what that means for their curriculum, particularly for years 11 and for years 13. There are, of course, there is, of course, a contingency in there that teacher assessed grades will be used should that need arise over the coming months. So we are working very closely with our schools to try and help and support them as much as we can, but most schools are getting on and just delivering the education that's needed in order to keep going. The disruption from the pandemic has lessened obviously significantly, although we are still seeing some of our students who are off poorly with COVID.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor? Okay. Yes, Councillor, you have a question?
Hi, this is to Alan, Kath, whoever. In 5.1 it mentions that inspections have been resumed, although services that are outstanding or good will not be inspected in the short term. And I mean, I could have just misread this, by the way. Below it mentions that 4 providers went from good to requires improvement. And yet, I just wonder why they went to requires improvement, and it said above that they weren't being inspected in the short term. But that's maybe just my misunderstanding. 5.1.
Yes, thank you. Yes, just in relation to those, just in relation to those inspections, those were ones that within the independent sector, and all of the local authority managed provision is currently judged as being outstanding and good, but within the independent sector. That's where those inspections took place.
So do we know what the issues were that sent these 4 providers from good to requires improvement?
I'll pass to Kath. She has her hand up.
I haven't got the exact detail of those particular 4 providers, but I can get that to you if you need to know that. I can get that information to you.
But I mean, the key thing I'm taking away from this is that the all local authority managed provision remains either outstanding or good, and that is quite an important sentence in there, isn't it?
It is, yes. That's been the case for a number of years.
Yeah, good, excellent. Any more questions on this one? Okay, well, thank you very much for that. That's very positive and very encouraging report. So this is just for our information, so there's nothing to be voted for on here. So we'll move on to item 12, which is the report of the external auditor, and it's the 2020-21 progress report, which I think Cameron should have.
Thanks, Chair. It's actually the audit plan for 2021, but it gives progress. I'll go through it. I'll take it as read. I'll go through sort of some of the high-level messages. So the first thing to say is that our responsibilities in relation to the accounts, the narrative statement the Council has produced and the annual governance statement remain unchanged from last year to this year. So we obviously must audit the accounts and give an opinion. We audit the annual governance statement, as I've already said, and that forms part of the audit report. We make explicit reference to that. We also audit things like senior officers' remuneration in the financial statements themselves. We consider going concern because that is an important concept, both in terms of the way the accounts are produced, but also the audit reports, recognising that it would be very difficult for a local authority not to be a going concern. And given the Council's level of reserves, it would be quite difficult, I think, to say that Northumberland wasn't. You'll be aware, Chair, that members of the public do have rights in relation to our audit and also your accounts. To date, we have had no questions or objections in relation to 2021. We must report to the NEO because that forms part of all the government accounts. And just an important point around about fraud, in that we have to pay attention and be observant in carrying out the audit for the possibility of fraud, but the primary responsibility for detecting that does not rest with external audit. So if we find anything that looks unusual, that is something we would raise with the appropriate person or body, depending on what that was. The key thing that has changed from last year to this year is the Code of Audit Practice, which you're probably aware of. That's changed our responsibilities in relation to value for money. Essentially, that moves us away from the old qualified, unqualified, more to is there a significant weakness? Is there something that we have to make a significant recommendation in relation to? At some point, somebody will summarise the results of the NHS audits this year, and there have been a number of significant recommendations made by external auditors across the country over the last 12 months, often in relation to CQC, but not solely to do with that. Sometimes to do with governance issues, sometimes to do with issues in relation to financial sustainability. In terms of Northumberland, the engagement team in terms of myself, it remains unchanged in the manager. So still the same people. We think continuity is important. You'll see that we also have an engagement quality control reviewer because of some of the issues that we're aware of in Northumberland. The person that's been appointed in that role, well, I'm not going to name him because the idea is you don't know who it is, so you can't go to him if you don't like what I say. He is our national challenge lead, so he specialises in thorny governance and legal issues, which I think is probably helpful. In terms of timeline, things slightly different to last year. We are completing interim work as we speak, hoping to get that finished by the end of this month. We've actually started to do some of the testing on the accounts already in the background. We've just not been bothering Jan and our team too much so far. We've been bothering the valuer more, Jan, so far. You'll be pleased to hear. We are hoping to complete that field work around about Christmas time, so we're in a position to just get the whole audit done and dusted late this year, early in the new year, so we can just start afresh and start to move back towards the whatever the statutory deadline is for publishing audited accounts next time round. Who knows what that will be. In terms of the group, I think you're aware, Chair, that we audit both the County Council, the parent, but we also audit Advanced Northumberland. In the interest of independence, the firm has appointed a separate partner, manager and team to do that work. That person reports into me as the group engagement lead. And we work closely together, but the judgments, etc., are reached by him in relation to advanced accounts. I'm really interested in what happens when the whole thing's consolidated. So there are certain things we will ask that team to do where they probably end up doing slightly more work than they would do if it's just a standalone company audit, because we need that assurance. In terms of management experts, there's no fundamental changes. You still use an actuary around about pensions. You still do use BNP for valuing your estates, and you still use Link in terms of your financial instruments disclosures, so Treasury management experts essentially. So as appropriate, we use third-party experts. They're normally appointed by the NEO to give us some assurance and do other things as well. This year, we have actually recruited a valuation team, and we will be involving the valuation team in all of our large local government clients on valuing, because that tends to be blunt, the area we tend to find the biggest problems, because I hadn't realised just how complicated valuations are. But when our valuations partner now explains them to me, I start to become very interested in them, but then have to ask quite a lot of questions. So that's why we appoint an expert to look at that. So he will be liaising directly with BNP in that particular area because of that complexity. In terms of significant risks, in terms of the opinion and the accounts, you'll see management override remains a risk. It must be a risk. It's a risk in all audits, not specific to Northumberland. That's quite important because that relates to the fraud risk around about management always being in a position to essentially amend the accounts to make them look better or worse than they should actually be. So obviously we apply quite a lot of professional scepticism in that area, focus our attention on the estimates, the judgments and anything that looks a bit odd. That's not obviously technical audit speak, that last bit, but you know probably the sentiment. We also have the pensions in there. That's because there's a lot of estimation uncertainty in there, very complex actuarial models, and the numbers can change significantly from one year to the next. So we spend quite a lot of time auditing that area as well. And we've seen some interesting movements this year in terms of pension liabilities, which we are at the moment trying to get to the bottom of in some other clients that use the same actuary as Northumberland. In terms of property, plant and equipment, it's more the property bit we're interested in, to be blunt, because that's the one that has the estimation uncertainty, because that's the one that's subject to estimation uncertainty by the valuer. So we spend quite a bit of time auditing that area. So if you look at your accounts, the two big numbers that stand out, pensions and property. That's why we spend so much time on that. Slightly unusually, we have valuation of short and long-term debtors. Not because we think Northumberland's any riskier than the other clients. It's just because if you think about it in the context of the pandemic, it's more difficult to collect debt. Therefore, there are more judgments involved around about this sort of it used to be called a provision. It's not called that now. Expected credit loss allowance is the new terminology for that. So in other words, the amount the council thinks you may not be able to collect in the future. So again, important level of scepticism on the part of the auditor to make sure that that's appropriately reflected in the accounts, because that does actually have a bottom line impact. Yeah. That might not be a risk in future years when the pandemic effect's passed, but still more scepticism there now. We also have a new risk this year, and Jan very helpfully, I think, outlined the position on COVID-19 grants earlier. But needless to say, there are a number of principles around about that that make the recognition of those in accounts slightly more tricky than they have been in previous years. There's a lot of money involved. As a result, we feel that is a significant risk. It links back to one of the other fraud risks around about revenue recognition. So the council recognising income that it's not entitled to recognise, or recognising it earlier or later than it should in its accounts. And again, it's not because we think the council's doing that, but we have to show that professional scepticism in that area. Because again, potential bottom line impact. And we know there are some grants, actually essentially the council's just acting as an agent of central government. Where that's the case, they shouldn't be recognised in the accounts. So that's the area of focus really around about that area.
Just picking up on that, Cameron, would that answer Councillor Dickinson's earlier point about the money that comes from government, which we are now having to find the gap, if you like? There was a point earlier on which Councillor Dickinson made, is that we assumed we were going to get this money back fully returned, but it doesn't look like it might happen. Is that the sort of area that would be covered
Perhaps
in there?
partly yes, Chair, in the sense that it does or doesn't go through your accounts. It would be slightly ironic if central government is chasing Northumberland County Council for money that's not Northumberland County Council's money in the first place, is possibly the broader principle, if you think that through. So if you're acting as an agent of central government, so in other words, you're being given money, but your role is essentially just to dish that out to business or others, then you're acting as an agent, not the principal. The principal is central government. Where that's the case, you shouldn't account for that money. You still account for the cash, but not actually the income and expenditure in the accounts, because essentially you're spending somebody else's cash.
That's good, thank you.
In terms of the final point, again, it's pandemic related, which is you obviously hold shares in Newcastle Airport. We don't think significant risk. We are aware that airport trading has improved over the last 12-month period, but nevertheless, we still think this is an area of judgment around about the level of essentially the allowance you would make in terms of any impairment of shares, valuation of loan notes, but also the valuation of the investment. So again, a degree of scepticism will be applied in relation to that. We have completed that work already at several other local authorities in the North East with nothing significant. So as long as Northumberland County Council has applied the same methodology, or broadly similar methodology, I think it'd be unlikely we would have reporting points there, but I'm not going to second guess the audit results until we've completed the work. In terms of value for money, you'll see in there that we have said that we are still completing the earlier work, therefore the risk assessment is incomplete. What I can tell you is one area we will be following up this year is the work that has been done on the Constitution over the last 12 to 15, 16 months, updating it following last summer. So we will be applying a degree of scepticism in terms of that area, and we will be asking, no doubt, some questions of officers around about those amendments and the compliance of those amendments with the underlying legislation, as you would expect, Chair, because clearly that was one of the issues that we will be reporting on in 1920 when we get to that point. We do not expect to have, and Jan will be pleased to hear this, a risk around about financial sustainability. It would be unusual to have that, where you have a council with circa £1/3 of £1 billion in usable reserves at the year end, which is somewhat unusual, although not hugely out of sync with many other local authorities who've seen the reserves go up, just not to that level, I think, in most cases. And I think it's Kath McAvoy-Carr's, isn't it, and Alan's report around about Ofsted, CQC, etc., is helpful to us, because that is very important in relation to the third criteria around about the 3 E's. Essentially, how is the council performing? What do other inspectorates think about you? I think I mentioned before that, generally speaking, a lot of recommendations that have been made under the new code relate to failures from inspections carried out by those two agencies, or indeed HMI CFRS for police and fire. Beyond that, the fee is what's agreed via PSAA. Important to highlight from an independence point of view that we do some other work for the council. All of that is called audit-related insurance services, to use Financial Reporting Council terminology. So that is work that the council needs to commission to provide assurance to central government in relation to teachers' pensions, benefits, and also the pooling of housing capital receipts, where you sell council houses and receive a receipt. You need to have that done. Generally speaking, we're well placed to do it. We don't think there's a conflict. The fees are minuscule compared to the overall fee for the audit. So you'll see from there, we highlight those so the committee is aware of it. We don't think there's a threat to our independence from carrying out that work for various different reasons, and we haven't put safeguards in place because we don't think actually there's a threat that needs a safeguard. Beyond that, Chair, you'll see there's a section on independence that covers the team. There is a section on materiality where we haven't fundamentally changed the approach. We have increased it slightly to recognise the fact this is now a second-year audit, not a first-year audit. And we have that assurance, as Jan pointed out, over the opening balances now as well. And we have that experience from the first year, which allows us to focus that risk in the areas that probably needs the most attention, which fundamentally I think is around about the valuation of the council's estate. Beyond that, the appendix is, it's not a hugely exciting appendix, Chair, but the ISAs require us to communicate with those charged with governance, which is the Audit Committee, the different points that we need to formally report through to you. That basically is designed to tell you what those points are and when we will do it, essentially in which report we'll do that. So this report fulfills some of that function. The audit completion report that you'll receive late this year, early next year, will fulfil the rest of it. Happy to take questions.
Well, thank you for that.
That's a bit of a canter through, but probably covers the salient points from the report.
Right, thank you for that, Cameron. That was very clear. I find the report in its entirety is very clear and very simple to follow for what is probably a very complex process that has been well laid out. So I'll take any questions if we have any. No? Okay, well, thank you for that. I think we'll take that as...
Chair, there's one other thing, I guess, in terms of the committee work programme. At some point over the next couple of months, PSAA, who you're now part of that contractual framework, you'll be aware, will publish the results of the external quality reviews on the firm. So I think you should timetable something probably for the next committee or the one after to formally consider that from a transparency point of view, because clearly the committee should be interested in the quality results of the external auditor.
Right, we'll take that one as noted. Thank you. Right, if we don't have any questions on that, yes.
Sorry, it's not on that point, Chair, but I am up to the time where I said I needed to leave, and I just wondered what that did to the proceedings.
I don't think we have anything that needs to be voted on after this point.
I think, Chair, if we could go into private while you're still here, Councillor Dickinson, and then we'll be in the area with the last three reports to note. So I think we might be able to deal with it as long as you...
And ironically, one of them are the ones I asked for, so that's really helpful.
Okay, so should we take that as our next step forward then? Because we normally would move on to urgent business on this. Can we keep that to the end? And
we dealt with that already, Chair.
I think was there any more urgent business? Well, obviously the urgent business is the bit that I brought forward, which was earlier on, but I did say I would take any further urgent business.
I wanted to sort of follow up on those three items I raised earlier, but I'm happy to do that in the confidential part.
Can we do that offline, Councillor,
yeah.
possibly? Because I think that would probably be just as easy and probably just as profitable to do that offline.
I'll just circulate something to the whole committee then. And,
okay,
yeah,
that would be.
I have to say, Chair,
yeah.
technically urgent business has to be arranged beforehand anyway with certain approvals.
Yeah.
So that would be best.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll do it that way. So we'll take urgent business offline and if we can circulate that. So we'll close down the open part of the meeting. So the date and time of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 24th of November at 10:15. So, okay, so if we can ask IT to switch off the live feed and let us know when that's been done.